Today's story dives into 3 heartbreaking cases of young lives lost too soon. First, the chilling story of Abigail Williams and Liberty German, 2 teens whose final moments were captured on Snapchat, leaving behind haunting clues to their killer. Then, the tragic case of Tori Stafford, an 8-year-old girl lured from her schoolyard and brutally murdered in a crime that shocked an entire nation. Finally, the devastating murder of Jessica Ridgeway, a 10-year-old abducted on her way to school, whose case revealed the unimaginable actions of a teenage killer. But before we begin, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, you've come to the right place. We upload daily, so be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Alright, let's get into today's story. On the afternoon of February 13, 2017, the small town of Delphi, Indiana, basked in an unseasonably warm winter day. The snow had melted, and the sun cast a golden glow over the High Bridge Trail, a popular spot for locals to hike and enjoy the serene beauty of nature. It was a school day, but for 13-year-old Abigail Williams and 14-year-old Liberty German, it was also a perfect opportunity to explore the trail during a break in their schedules. The girls, inseparable best friends, had planned this outing with excitement. Liberty, affectionately called Libby by her family, was the organizer of their little adventure. She'd convinced her older sister, Kelsey, to drop them off at the trailhead that afternoon. The plan was simple: enjoy the outdoors, snap some photos, and meet their ride home at a designated time. Abigail, or Abby, carried her signature sketchbook, always ready to capture inspiration, while Libby held her phone, documenting their journey in real time. The High Bridge Trail is known for its centerpiece, an abandoned railroad bridge towering 70 feet above Deer Creek. The bridge, though breathtaking, was precarious, with its weathered planks and no railings. It was a spot frequented by hikers and photographers seeking a thrill, but it was also eerily quiet on that particular day. The girls approached the bridge, giggling and posing for photos as they prepared to cross. Libby captured the moment on Snapchat, sharing a photo of Abby standing on the bridge. The image was carefree, showing 2 friends enjoying a peaceful afternoon. What they didn't know was that someone was watching them. A man dressed in a blue jacket and jeans appeared on the bridge in the distance. He was walking toward them, his face partially obscured by a hat. At first, the girls didn't seem alarmed. They continued to walk and chat, perhaps assuming he was another hiker enjoying the trail. But something about the man's demeanor changed. His pace quickened, his body language grew tense. Sensing that something wasn't right, Libby made a decision that would later prove critical. She discreetly began recording on her phone. The short video captured the man's approach and his chilling command: "Down the hill." The words were calm but firm, leaving no room for misunderstanding. What happened next is not fully known, but it's believed that the girls were led off the bridge toward the wooded area near the creek. Hours passed, and when the time came for their ride home, Abby and Libby were nowhere to be found. Their families, initially assuming the girls had lost track of time, began calling their phones. When the calls went unanswered, panic set in. The families contacted friends, neighbors, and eventually law enforcement, initiating a search that would extend late into the night. The trail, once a place of beauty and tranquility, was now a scene of growing dread. Flashlights scanned the dense woods, voices called out the girls' names, and every rustling leaf felt like a clue. But as the hours ticked by, the hope of finding Abby and Libby safe began to wane. It wasn't until the following day, February 14th, that the devastating discovery was made. Searchers located the bodies of Abigail Williams and Liberty German near Deer Creek, just a short distance from the High Bridge. The details of what transpired in their final moments remain a guarded secret, held closely by investigators to preserve the integrity of the case. What was clear, however, was that their lives had been violently taken. The community of Delphi, a town of fewer than 3,000 people, was rocked to its core. This was a place where everyone knew each other, where doors were left unlocked, and where children roamed freely. The loss of Abby and Libby shattered that sense of security, replacing it with grief, fear, and an urgent demand for answers. As news of the tragedy spread, so did the mystery surrounding it. Who was the man in the blue jacket? Why had he targeted 2 young girls in broad daylight? And how could a place so familiar suddenly feel so foreign, so dangerous? Unbeknownst to the town, Liberty German's quick thinking had left investigators with their most crucial piece of evidence: the chilling video and audio captured on her phone. The grainy image of the man, combined with his haunting words, would soon become the focal point of a case that captivated and horrified the nation. But on that February day, as the sun set over Delphi, all that remained were questions and a community desperate for justice. The morning of February 15, 2017, dawned heavy with grief and confusion in Delphi, Indiana. The discovery of Abigail Williams and Liberty German near Deer Creek had shattered the town's sense of peace, replacing it with an overwhelming demand for answers. Law enforcement mobilized quickly, sealing off the crime scene and beginning a meticulous investigation. The trail, once bustling with hikers, was now eerily silent, marked by yellow tape and the presence of forensic teams. Investigators combed the area, searching for any evidence that might lead them to the person responsible. The terrain was challenging. Dense woods, uneven ground, and the frigid February air made the task arduous. Despite the conditions, the team remained resolute. They collected soil samples, documented footprints, and scoured the creek banks for anything that could provide a clue. At the heart of the investigation was Liberty's phone. Investigators had recovered it during their initial search, and it quickly became evident that it held critical information. The video she had recorded of the man on the bridge was their first major lead. All of the footage was grainy. It captured his face and body language clearly enough to provide a description: a man in a blue jacket, jeans, and a hat. The audio clip, where he said, "down the hill," was haunting, a command that hinted at his intent without revealing his identity. The decision to release parts of the video and audio to the public was a calculated one. Law enforcement hoped that someone, somewhere, would recognize the man's voice or the way he walked. Within hours of the release, the image and audio went viral. News outlets broadcasted it nationwide, and social media platforms were flooded with speculation. The man on the bridge became a symbol of the fear-gripping Delphi, a shadowy figure whose presence loomed over the investigation. As tips poured in, the police faced an overwhelming volume of information. Every call, email, and message had to be vetted, leading to long hours and exhaustive efforts. Some tips seemed promising. Reports of a man matching the description seen near the trail that day, vehicles parked suspiciously in the area, but none led to a definitive breakthrough. Frustration mounted as the days turned into weeks, and the suspect remained at large. For the families of Abby and Libby, the wait was agonizing. Their homes became the epicenters of grief and determination, filled with family, friends, and community members offering support. Despite the overwhelming sorrow, they refused to let the case fade from the public's attention. Abigail's mother and Liberty's grandparents spoke at press conferences, their voices steady but heavy with emotion. "We need your help," they urged the public. "If you know anything, no matter how small it seems, please come forward." In the town of Delphi, the impact of the tragedy was felt everywhere. The Monon High Bridge Trail, once a cherished spot for locals, now carried an air of unease. Parents held their children closer, and strangers eyed one another with suspicion. Memorials for Abby and Libby sprang up throughout the community. The bridge itself became a focal point, adorned with flowers, notes, and photos of the girls. The pain of the loss was amplified by the sense of vulnerability that lingered. How could this have happened in broad daylight? And more troubling, was the perpetrator someone from their own community? Delphi, a town where everyone knew each other, was now filled with whispers and theories, its close-knit fabric strained by the weight of the unknown. Despite the challenges, law enforcement remained committed. A task force was established, bringing together local, state, and federal agencies. They analyzed every piece of evidence, from the recorded audio to the footprints near the creek. Behavioral analysts were brought in to profile the suspect, offering insights into his potential motives and habits. Still, the shadow of uncertainty loomed large. The town rallied around the families, determined to support them through the darkest days. Fundraisers were held to aid the investigation, and volunteers distributed flyers featuring the suspect's image across the state. Abby and Libby's story resonated far beyond Delphi, drawing attention from people across the nation. Strangers sent letters of support, donations, and prayers, moved by the bravery of two young girls whose actions had left behind the most crucial evidence. But even as the community came together, the questions remained. Who was the man on the bridge? Why had he targeted Abby and Libby? And most haunting of all, was he still out there, watching and waiting? The answers felt tantalizingly close, yet maddeningly out of reach, leaving Delphi in a state of limbo. A town united in its grief and its unrelenting pursuit of justice. As weeks turned into months, the case of Abigail Williams and Liberty German grew into something far larger than Delphi. The small Indiana town, once known for its serene trails and close-knit community, was now at the center of a national story. News stations from across the country descended upon the area, their cameras capturing the somber faces of a grieving town. The haunting image of the man on the Monon High Bridge and the chilling audio of his command, "Down the hill," played repeatedly, becoming etched into the collective consciousness of a nation. Investigators continued their work tirelessly, navigating through an overwhelming sea of tips and leads. Each new piece of information brought hope, only to fade into frustration when it failed to yield results. Still, they pressed on, aware that every call, every email, and every interview could be the one to break the case wide open. In May 2017, law enforcement released a composite sketch of the suspect, created with the help of witnesses who had been near the trail on the day of the murders. The sketch depicted a man with a narrow face, a prominent nose, and a goatee. It was the first clear visual representation of the suspect beyond the grainy video footage, and it reignited public interest in the case. Flyers featuring the sketch were distributed across Indiana and neighboring states, and billboards went up along major highways. The goal was simple: make the man's face impossible to ignore. The release of the sketch brought in another wave of tips, each one meticulously logged and investigated. Some seemed credible, pointing to individuals with troubling histories or suspicious behavior. Others were less so, wild theories and baseless accusations that had to be sifted through nonetheless. For the task force, the challenge was balancing the need for thoroughness with the pressure to make progress. The weight of expectation from the community and the nation was immense. Meanwhile, the families of Abby and Libby refused to let the case fade into the background. They became tireless advocates, appearing at press conferences, speaking with reporters, and keeping their daughters' memories alive in the public eye. For Liberty's grandparents, Mike and Becky Patty, and Abigail's mother, Anna Williams, the fight for justice was deeply personal. They shared stories about the girls' lives, their laughter, their dreams, their love for their families, reminding the world that this case was not just about a crime. It was about two lives taken far too soon. Their efforts were bolstered by a growing movement online. True crime enthusiasts and amateur detectives took up the case, analyzing every detail released by law enforcement. They dissected the video, scrutinized the audio, and compared the composite sketch to known offenders in the area. Some even traveled to Delphi to walk the trail themselves, hoping to gain insights into the timeline and geography of the crime. The online community became a double-edged sword for investigators. While many provided thoughtful analysis and potential leads, others spread misinformation and conspiracy theories, complicating the already arduous investigation. Despite the challenges, the task force made steady, if incremental, progress. Advances in technology allowed them to enhance the video and audio, revealing additional details about the suspect's appearance and mannerisms. Behavioral analysts constructed a psychological profile, suggesting that the man was likely familiar with the area and had chosen the location deliberately. This pointed to the possibility that he was a local, or someone who had spent significant time in Delphi. The idea that the suspect might be someone from the community added a new layer of unease. Delphi was a town where everyone knew each other, where neighbors waved as they passed on the street. The thought that the person responsible for such a horrific act could be living among them was almost too much to bear. Yet, it was a possibility that could not be ignored. Community members remained vigilant, reporting anything they found suspicious. Law enforcement urged patience, reminding the public that solving a case of this magnitude required time and precision. But patience was a luxury that many in Delphi felt they couldn't afford. The fear of the unknown lingered, casting a shadow over every interaction, every corner of the town. Through it all, the memory of Abby and Libby shone brightly. Their names became a rallying cry, a reminder of why the fight for justice mattered so deeply. The trail where they had spent their final moments was transformed into a memorial, adorned with flowers, candles, and messages of love and hope. It was a place of mourning, but also of resolve, a testament to a community's determination to see justice done. As the investigation pressed on, the questions remained. Who was the man on the bridge? What had driven him to commit such an unspeakable act? And most importantly, when would he be found? The answers felt tantalizingly close, yet just out of reach, leaving Delphi suspended between hope and heartbreak as they awaited the breakthrough that would finally bring Abby and Libby's killer to justice. As the investigation into the tragic deaths of Abigail Williams and Liberty German stretched into its second year, the sense of urgency among both investigators and the community only deepened. The haunting image of the man on the Monon High Bridge and his chilling words, "Down the hill," remained central to the case. Law enforcement, determined to bring answers to Delphi, continued working tirelessly, poring over every detail and lead. In April 2019, investigators made a bold move. At a highly publicized press conference, they released a new composite sketch of the suspect, one that looked dramatically different from the original. The updated image depicted a younger-looking man with clean-shaven features, short hair, and an intense expression. Police explained that the original sketch was still relevant, but believed the new one might better represent the suspect. This shift in direction reignited public interest and speculation, sparking a fresh wave of theories. At the same press conference, investigators shared additional details about the suspect's behavior. They suggested that the man was someone familiar with Delphi, who might have been hiding in plain sight. The words they chose were chilling. "We believe you have lived or worked in this community." For many, this confirmed their worst fears, that the person responsible for such a heinous act could be among them. The announcement sent shockwaves through Delphi. The idea that the suspect could be a local added an unsettling layer to an already tense situation. Neighbors began to look at each other differently, their trust eroded by the possibility that the killer might be someone they passed on the street, someone they had shared a meal with, or exchanged pleasantries at the grocery store. Tips once again flooded in, each one meticulously reviewed by the task force. Investigators delved into the backgrounds of individuals who matched the updated sketch, revisiting interviews and re-examining prior leads. They scoured social media profiles and online activity, searching for anything that might provide a connection to the crime. The process was painstakingly slow, but no detail was considered too small. Meanwhile, the families of Abby and Libby continued to fight for justice, refusing to let their daughter's memories fade. They spoke at public events and used every opportunity to remind people of the urgency of the case. Liberty's grandparents, Mike and Becky Patty, became especially vocal, their words carrying the weight of their grief and their determination. "We will not stop until this person is found," Mike Patty stated at one gathering. "Justice for Libby and Abby is all that matters." The updated sketch and renewed focus on the local connection brought renewed scrutiny to the trail and surrounding areas. Behavioral analysts worked alongside investigators, mapping out the suspect's possible movements and examining the crime scene in greater detail. Their findings suggested that the location had been chosen deliberately, further indicating that the suspect was familiar with the terrain. As the investigation pressed on, the online true crime community remained as active as ever. Armchair detectives dissected the new composite sketch and compared it to individuals who had been previously discussed in connection to the case. Some theorized that the suspect might have changed his appearance since the murders, while others speculated about a possible connection to other unsolved crimes in the region. The internet's interest in the case, while sometimes helpful, also created challenges for law enforcement, as misinformation and unverified claims began to spread. Through it all, Delphi remained a town in mourning, but also in action. The Monon High Bridge Trail was transformed into a space for remembrance and resilience. A permanent memorial was erected in honor of Abby and Libby, serving as both a tribute to their lives and a reminder of the work still to be done. The community came together to support the families, holding fundraisers and vigils to keep the girls' memories alive. Despite the time that had passed, the presence of the suspect's image and the audio recording kept the case alive in the public's mind. The audio of "Down the Hill" became an indelible part of the story, played repeatedly at press conferences and media updates. It served as a call to action, urging anyone with information to come forward. But for all the progress made, the answers remained elusive. Each new lead brought with it a sense of hope, only for that hope to dim when the lead failed to produce results. The task force remained undeterred, knowing that the key to solving the case could be just one tip or breakthrough away. As Delphi braced itself for what came next, the town's resolve never wavered. The memory of Abigail Williams and Liberty German continued to inspire those who knew them and those who didn't, ensuring that their story would not be forgotten until justice was finally served. The investigation into the deaths of Abigail Williams and Liberty German entered its most critical phase as years turned into a relentless pursuit for answers. By late 2021, the hope of resolution burned brighter than ever, fueled by advancements in technology, renewed public attention, and the determination of investigators who had never stopped searching for the truth. For Delphi, the fight for justice was no longer just about the 2 lives lost. It was about restoring a community's trust, healing deep wounds, and ensuring that the person responsible could never harm anyone again. The task force's focus shifted heavily toward modern investigative tools, including genealogy-based DNA techniques that had solved numerous cold cases in recent years. Law enforcement carefully re-examined every piece of physical evidence collected from the scene, hoping that even the smallest trace of DNA might unlock the key to the suspect's identity. With each new test, there was a sense of cautious optimism, tempered by the patience required for such painstaking work. Meanwhile, the public's engagement with the case had evolved. True crime podcasts, YouTube creators, and online forums dedicated entire series to analyzing the evidence, interviewing those connected to the case, and theorizing about the suspect. The man on the bridge had become an infamous figure, his grainy image and chilling voice synonymous with one of the most haunting mysteries in recent memory. The collective power of this digital community kept the case in the national spotlight, ensuring it remained a priority for investigators and policymakers alike. The families of Abby and Libby continued to channel their grief into advocacy. They became outspoken champions for safety initiatives and legislative reforms aimed at preventing similar tragedies. Mike and Becky Patty, in particular, worked tirelessly to raise awareness about the dangers of social media and the importance of community vigilance. Their efforts led to the creation of educational programs and funding for enhanced safety measures in schools and public spaces, all in Abby and Libby's names. In Delphi, the Monon High Bridge Trail had transformed into a place of both remembrance and resilience. A permanent memorial honoring the girls stood as a testament to their impact, drawing visitors from near and far who came to pay their respects. Local artists created murals depicting Abby and Libby, capturing their bright smiles and infectious spirits. The community, though still grappling with the loss, found strength in its unity, determined to ensure that their memory lived on. Then, in early 2022, a new tip came in, one that reignited the investigation. A local man, who had lived near Delphi at the time of the murders, was identified as a person of interest. The individual's past behavior and physical resemblance to the updated composite sketch raised suspicions. Investigators moved swiftly, obtaining search warrants for his property and conducting extensive interviews with those who knew him. The case had taken a significant turn, and for the first time in years, there was a palpable sense that justice might finally be within reach. The announcement of this breakthrough sent ripples through Delphi. The community, while cautiously optimistic, remained acutely aware of the many false starts and dead ends that had marked the investigation. Law enforcement urged patience, emphasizing the need to build a case strong enough to withstand scrutiny in court. For the families of Abby and Libby, the development brought a bittersweet mix of relief and anxiety. They had waited so long for answers, but they knew the road ahead would still be challenging. As the investigation into this new lead unfolded, Delphi prepared for the possibility of closure. The town's resolve, shaped by years of grief and determination, had never wavered. Through vigils, community events, and tireless advocacy, the memory of Abigail Williams and Liberty German remained a source of strength and inspiration. The case impact extended far beyond the borders of Indiana. National conversations about public safety, the role of technology in solving crimes, and the importance of community vigilance were sparked by Abby and Libby's story. Their legacy became a rallying cry for change, a reminder of the resilience and power of a united community. While the final chapters of this story were still being written, one thing was certain. Abigail Williams and Liberty German would never be forgotten. Their bravery, captured in the haunting video and audio that had driven the investigation, stood as a testament to their courage and the strength of their bond. Their story was not just one of loss, but of a community's unwavering determination to find justice and honor their lives in every possible way. And so, as the search for answers continued, Delphi remained steadfast, its people bound together by the shared hope that one day, justice would prevail, and the memory of Abby and Libby would shine brighter than the shadows left behind. The next story is called Innocence Lost. On the afternoon of April 8, 2009, the streets of Woodstock, Ontario, were filled with the familiar hum of a spring day. School was out for the day, and children were spilling into the streets, their laughter and chatter echoing through the quiet neighborhoods. Among them was 8-year-old Tori Stafford, a bright and lively girl who had just finished her day at Oliver Stevens Public School. With her long blonde hair tied back and a big smile on her face, Tori set off on her usual walk home. The route was short, a path she had walked many times before. Her family trusted the neighborhood. Woodstock was a small town, the kind of place where everyone knew each other, where children played freely without fear. But that day, something was different. As Tori left the school grounds, she was approached by a woman. The stranger appeared friendly, casual, dressed in a white puffy jacket and sunglasses. She carried a small dog, an inviting detail that seemed to disarm Tori. Witnesses later recalled seeing the two talking, their interaction appearing ordinary. The woman gestured toward a nearby car parked just out of sight, and after a brief exchange, Tori followed her. Together, they disappeared around a corner, leaving behind a playground that was still buzzing with the energy of the day. What happened next would plunge an entire town into despair. When Tori failed to arrive home at her usual time, her mother, Tara McDonald, began to worry. At first, she thought Tori might have stopped to play with friends or gotten delayed at school. But as the minutes turned to hours, unease gave way to panic. Calls to Tori's friends and classmates yielded no answers, and by the evening, Tara contacted the police. The Stafford family's worst fears were beginning to take shape. The Woodstock Police Department wasted no time in responding. Officers canvassed the area, speaking to anyone who might have seen Tori after school. Volunteers poured into the streets, combing the neighborhood and nearby parks for any sign of the missing girl. Tori's face was plastered on flyers, her warm smile and bright eyes staring back at the community that desperately wanted to bring her home. Hours turned into the first sleepless night. As the search expanded, the questions grew darker. How could an 8-year-old simply vanish on a well-traveled route in broad daylight? And who was the woman she was seen talking to? The footage from a nearby surveillance camera provided the first concrete lead. Grainy but unmistakable, it showed Tori walking alongside the mysterious woman. She appeared calm, her small frame dwarfed by her companion, White. The image froze the hearts of everyone who saw it. The next day, the footage was released to the public. News stations broadcasted it across the country, and the clip circulated rapidly online. The woman's identity was unknown, but her distinctive clothing and the small dog she carried were details investigators hoped someone would recognize. Tips began flooding in, each one a potential lifeline for the Stafford family. As police worked tirelessly to follow the leads, the town of Woodstock was transformed. Parents gripped their children's hands a little tighter, their trust in the safety of their community shattered. Schools held assemblies on safety, urging students to walk in groups and remain vigilant. The streets, once lively and carefree, took on a tense, watchful atmosphere. Tori's family, meanwhile, clung to hope. Her parents and older brother, Darren, appeared before the media, pleading for her safe return. "We just want her home," Tara said, her voice cracking with emotion. Their words resonated across Canada, where the story of Tori's disappearance captured the hearts of a nation. But as the hours turned into days, a gnawing fear began to set in. The longer Tori remained missing, the more ominous the possibilities became. Police expanded their search, bringing in canine units and forensic experts to scour nearby fields, rivers, and abandoned buildings. The surveillance footage remained their strongest lead, but the identity of the woman in the white jacket remained a mystery. As the second night fell, Woodstock was a town holding its breath. The community, united in its grief and determination, refused to give up. Yet, beneath the surface was a growing dread. a silent acknowledgement that time was slipping away, and with it, the chances of bringing Tori home safe. In the midst of this despair, investigators received their first major breakthrough. A tip led them to a name, Terry Lynn McClintock. She was a local woman in her 20s, known to police for minor offenses. Her description matched the woman in the footage, down to the distinctive jacket and small dog. McClintock's name, once just a detail in a database, now became the focus of an investigation that would uncover a truth darker than anyone could have imagined. The identification of Terry Lynn McClintock marked a turning point in the search for Tori Stafford. Investigators, armed with the tip that placed McClintock as the woman in the surveillance footage, moved quickly to locate her. She was apprehended without resistance and brought in for questioning. What began as a routine interrogation soon unraveled into one of the most chilling revelations the small town of Woodstock had ever witnessed. McClintock, initially evasive, appeared nervous but composed. She denied any involvement, claiming she didn't recognize the girl in the footage. Investigators, however, were methodical. They presented her with evidence: the surveillance video, descriptions from witnesses, and other details that contradicted her story. Over hours of questioning, her confidence began to falter. Finally, faced with mounting evidence and the relentless pressure of seasoned investigators, McClintock broke. What she admitted was both horrifying and deeply disturbing. She confessed to luring Tori away from her school under the pretense of showing her a puppy, exploiting the innocence of an 8-year-old child. But she wasn't acting alone. She named her boyfriend, Michael Rafferty, as the mastermind behind the crime. McClintock's confession painted a grim picture of the events that unfolded after Tori's abduction. She described how Rafferty had instructed her to approach the girl, knowing that her presence as a woman would appear less threatening. Once Tori was in their car, McClintock said, the pair drove to a remote area outside of town. Her words were matter-of-fact, almost clinical, as she recounted the sequence of events. Investigators listened in shock, their questions carefully guiding her through the grim details. McClintock admitted to a level of participation that was deeply unsettling, revealing a side of herself that defied understanding. She spoke of her loyalty to Rafferty, a toxic and manipulative relationship that had pushed her into unspeakable actions. While her confession provided clarity, it also left investigators grappling with the sheer magnitude of the crime. They immediately turned their attention to Michael Rafferty. Surveillance and tactical units tracked his movements, ensuring he couldn't escape as they gathered the evidence needed to bring him in. Days after McClintock's confession, Rafferty was arrested in his driveway, his demeanor calm but unreadable. With both suspects in custody, the focus shifted to finding Tori. McClintock's statements provided critical information about the location where she and Rafferty had taken the young girl. Under police escort, she led investigators to a secluded area near Mount Forest, a rural spot far from the safety of Woodstock. What they found there confirmed their worst fears. The remains of Tori Stafford were discovered, hidden under a pile of rocks. The scene was carefully processed, every piece of evidence meticulously cataloged. The news devastated the community. For days, Woodstock had clung to the hope that Tori might still be alive. Her discovery brought a heartbreaking finality to that hope, replacing it with a grief that swept through the town like a tidal wave. Vigils were held in her honor, candles flickering against the night as neighbors, friends, and strangers came together to mourn. For Tori's family, the pain was indescribable. Her mother, Tara McDonald, spoke publicly, her voice filled with anguish as she thanked the community for their support. "She was our angel," she said, tears streaming down her face. The strength it took to face the cameras, to share their heartbreak with the world, was unimaginable. As the investigation into Rafferty and McClintock continued, more disturbing details emerged. Forensic evidence from the crime scene corroborated McClintock's confession, linking both suspects to the location where Tori had been found. The case against them was growing stronger by the day, but the weight of what had been uncovered lingered heavily over everyone involved. Woodstock, once a quiet and trusting town, was now a community on edge. Parents who had once let their children walk freely now held their hands tightly. The streets felt different, quieter, darker, as though the crime had cast a permanent shadow over the town. And yet, amidst the sorrow, there was a shared determination to see justice done. The stage was set for what would become one of the most closely watched legal proceedings in Canadian history. As the case moved toward trial, the focus turned to ensuring that Tori's memory would be honored and that those responsible for her death would face the full weight of the law. But the details that would emerge in court would only deepen the sense of tragedy, leaving a nation grappling with the senselessness of the crime and the devastating loss of a child who had touched so many lives. The trial of Terry Lynn McClintock and Michael Rafferty exposed a grim and unsettling picture of the events surrounding Tori Stafford's disappearance. As the details of their actions emerged, the courtroom became a place of intense emotion, a battle between the search for justice and the weight of the horrors revealed. Terry Lynn McClintock, who had already confessed to her involvement, became a key figure in the proceedings. Her testimony was both shocking and chilling. She described in detail how she had lured Tori away from her schoolyard with the promise of seeing a puppy. The simple kindness and trust of a child had been weaponized in the most despicable way. As McClintock recounted the events of that afternoon, the courtroom fell silent, her words hanging heavy in the air. McClintock painted herself as a reluctant participant, claiming that Michael Rafferty had been the driving force behind the crime. She described him as manipulative and controlling, someone who had pressured her into actions she might not have committed otherwise. But the prosecution countered this narrative, highlighting McClintock's own violent tendencies and her willingness to participate in the events. Forensic evidence backed up much of her testimony, but also suggested a deeper level of complicity than she was willing to admit. Michael Rafferty, on the other hand, maintained his innocence. His defense team argued that McClintock's account was unreliable, pointing to inconsistencies in her story and her history of violent behavior. They painted Rafferty as a scapegoat, someone who had been dragged into the crime by McClintock's actions. But the evidence against him was overwhelming. Cell phone records, witness statements, and forensic findings placed him at every critical moment of the crime. The prosecution described him as the mastermind, someone who had planned and executed the crime with chilling precision. The court heard harrowing details of Tori's final moments, the unimaginable suffering she endured at the hands of her captors. The testimonies of forensic experts and investigators painted a clear picture of the cruelty inflicted upon her, leaving the jury and spectators visibly shaken. It was a stark reminder of the humanity lost in the violence and the need to ensure that those responsible face the full weight of justice. Tori's family sat in the courtroom every day, their grief etched into their faces. They listened as every detail of their daughter's final hours was laid bare, a brutal but necessary process to secure a conviction. Their strength and resilience became a source of inspiration for the community, a reminder that even in the face of unimaginable loss, they would not waver in their fight for justice. The trial also revealed disturbing insights into the relationship between McClintock and Rafferty. Witnesses testified to their toxic dynamic, one fueled by manipulation and shared darkness. The prosecution argued that their relationship had created a dangerous synergy, one that led to the crime. The defense attempted to shift blame back and forth, each side trying to minimize their client's role. But for the jury, the evidence spoke louder than words. As the trial progressed, the weight of the case became evident not just in the courtroom, but across the nation. Media coverage was relentless, with every detail scrutinized and debated. The public's anger and grief were palpable, a reflection of the collective pain felt by a country mourning the loss of an innocent child. The case sparked conversations about safety, justice, and the systems that had failed to protect Tori. In the closing arguments, the prosecution left no room for ambiguity. They described the crime as a calculated and heinous act, one that demanded the harshest penalty. The defense, meanwhile, appealed to the jury's sense of doubt, questioning the reliability of McClintock's testimony and the extent of Rafferty's involvement. But, as the jury deliberated, the outcome felt inevitable. The courtroom was packed on the day the verdict was read. The air was thick with anticipation, every eye on the judge as the jury's decision was announced. Michael Rafferty was found guilty on all counts, including first-degree murder, kidnapping, and assault. The sentence was life in prison, without the possibility of parole, a judgment that brought a measure of closure to a grieving family and community. For Tori's family, the verdict was bittersweet. Justice had been served, but it could never undo the loss they had suffered. Their daughter's life, so full of promise, had been taken in the most horrific way. Yet, In their grief, they found a sense of purpose to honor Tori's memory by advocating for change, ensuring that no other family would endure the pain they had experienced. The trial was over, but its impact would ripple far beyond the walls of the courtroom. It became a defining moment, a call to action for a nation to do better, to protect its children, and to hold those who harmed them accountable. Tori Stafford's story was one of heartbreak and resilience, a reminder of the fragility of innocence and the strength of a community united in its fight for justice. The aftermath of the verdict brought a grim sense of resolution, but for Tori Stafford's family and the community of Woodstock, the journey toward healing was just beginning. While Michael Rafferty's conviction ensured he would never harm another innocent soul, the shadow of the crime loomed over everyone it had touched. The courtroom remained a focal point of emotion as sentencing hearings began. Testimonies from Tori's family and loved ones painted a vivid picture of the vibrant, joyful child she had been. Her mother, Tara McDonald, spoke through tears about the gaping hole left in their lives. "Tori wasn't just my daughter, she was my heart," she said, her voice trembling with grief but steady with resolve. Her words resonated deeply, reminding everyone present that Tori's story was more than just a case file. It was the loss of a bright young life that had touched so many. As part of the sentencing phase, the court delved deeper into Rafferty's background. Psychologists and behavioral experts testified about his troubling tendencies, describing a man who had long displayed manipulative behavior and a lack of empathy. While the defense attempted to present mitigating factors, the evidence of Rafferty's calculated actions left little room for leniency. His demeanor remained cold and detached, further underscoring the prosecution's argument that he was beyond redemption. Terry Lynn McClintock, though already sentenced for her role in the crime, remained a significant figure in the proceedings. Her testimony, which had been instrumental in Rafferty's conviction, was both a source of clarity and a haunting reminder of the crime's brutality. McClintock herself expressed remorse, but whether her regret was genuine or self-serving remained a point of contention. The court was left to weigh her actions against her words, a task made all the more difficult by the gravity of what had transpired. Outside the courtroom, the community of Woodstock struggled to regain its footing. Schools held assemblies and workshops focused on child safety, urging parents and children to stay vigilant. Local organizations began offering resources for families, emphasizing the importance of open communication and awareness. The tragedy had shaken the town to its core, but it also galvanized its residents, uniting them in their shared grief and determination to prevent another loss. Vigils for Tori continued to be held, each one a powerful reminder of the lives she had touched. Her favorite color, purple, became a symbol of hope and resilience. Ribbons were tied around trees and lampposts, fluttering in the wind as silent tributes to a girl whose memory would never fade. Local artists created murals in her honor, transforming public spaces into places of reflection and remembrance. The national impact of Tori's story was undeniable. Her case spurred conversations about systemic failures, from the need for stricter monitoring of offenders to better resources for at-risk individuals. Advocacy groups took up her cause, pushing for reforms that would enhance protections for children and hold perpetrators accountable. In the wake of such a devastating loss, these efforts became a way to channel grief into action. For Tori's family, the fight didn't end with the verdict. They dedicated themselves to ensuring her legacy would inspire positive change. Tara McDonald and her family established initiatives in Tori's name, focusing on child safety education and support for families affected by similar tragedies. They partnered with local and national organizations, speaking at events and sharing their story to raise awareness and spark action. The court's final sentencing of Rafferty marked the end of one chapter, but left lingering questions about the nature of the crime and the individuals involved. How had such darkness gone unnoticed? Could the signs have been detected earlier? These questions weighed heavily on those who had followed the case, prompting introspection and a collective resolve to do better. As the courtroom proceedings concluded, Tori's story remained a symbol of both heartbreak and hope. Her life, though tragically short, had left an indelible mark on those who knew her and those who came to know her story. The legal process had brought justice, but the true measure of her legacy lay in the changes her story inspired: a community more vigilant, a nation more aware, and a world determined to protect its most vulnerable. In the years following the trial, the ripples of Tori Stafford's story continued to shape her community and beyond. While her family worked tirelessly to honor her memory, her tragic death also ignited broader changes in child safety awareness, justice reform, and public vigilance. Though the pain of losing Tori could never truly be erased, her story became a catalyst for resilience and transformation. Tori's family, particularly her mother, Tara McDonald, became advocates for change. They spoke at schools, community centers, and national events, sharing Tori's story to remind others of the importance of vigilance and compassion. Tara's message was clear: no family should endure the heartbreak her own had suffered. She partnered with organizations focused on child safety, lending her voice to initiatives aimed at educating parents and children about the dangers that can lurk in seemingly ordinary places. A foundation was established in Tori's name, dedicated to promoting safety and supporting families affected by similar tragedies. Purple, her favorite color, became the organization's emblem, symbolizing hope and strength. Through this foundation, scholarships were created, community programs were funded, and awareness campaigns reached thousands. In this way, Tori's legacy grew into something much larger than her small-town beginnings, touching lives across Canada and beyond. The community of Woodstock transformed as well. The park near Tori's school was renovated and renamed in her honor, a space where families could gather, children could play, and visitors could reflect on her life. A plaque bearing her name and a message of hope was placed at the park's entrance, ensuring that her story would not be forgotten. Each year, the town held an annual walk in her memory, bringing together neighbors, friends, and strangers to honor her and recommit to protecting the most vulnerable among them. The case also left an indelible mark on the Canadian justice system. Advocacy groups used Tori's story to push for stricter penalties for offenders and more comprehensive monitoring of those at risk of committing harm. Laws were revisited and policies were strengthened, aiming to close the gaps that had allowed individuals like Michael Rafferty and Tara Lynn McClintock to commit such a heinous act. These changes were not without debate, but the momentum generated by Tori's case made it clear that complacency was no longer an option. Forensic and law enforcement communities also learned valuable lessons from the investigation. The collaboration between local police, provincial agencies, and national resources set a new standard for handling abduction cases. Training programs incorporated key elements of the Stafford investigation, emphasizing the importance of rapid response, community engagement, and the use of technology in tracking offenders. As Tori's family and community worked to heal, they found solace in the small ways her memory continued to shine. Stories of her kindness and bright spirit were shared among friends and classmates. Teachers remembered her eagerness to learn and her infectious laugh. These memories, though bittersweet, became anchors of hope in the face of loss. The larger public also found ways to keep Tori's memory alive. True crime communities online discussed her case with a focus on prevention and education, ensuring her story served as a reminder to prioritize safety. Social media became a platform for sharing resources and spreading awareness, with posts about Tori often accompanied by purple ribbons and heartfelt messages. For the Stafford family, each day was a testament to their resilience. They celebrated Tori's birthdays with small gatherings, planting flowers in her favorite colors and releasing balloons into the sky. These moments, though filled with sorrow, also carried a sense of purpose, a reminder that her life, though tragically short, had left a profound impact on everyone who knew her, and even those who didn't. As the years passed, the legacy of Tori Stafford evolved. Her story became not just a symbol of loss, but of hope, strength, and the power of a community to come together in the face of tragedy. It reminded the world of the importance of protecting children, of holding those who cause harm accountable, and of ensuring that even in the darkest times, light can emerge. Tori's story continues to resonate today, a poignant reminder that while the actions of a few can bring unspeakable pain, the love and determination of many can bring healing and change. Her legacy lives on in every step taken towards safety, every child protected, and every voice raised in her name. And through that legacy, Tori Stafford will always be remembered. The next and final story is called A Young Life Stolen. On the crisp morning of October 5, 2012, the streets of Westminster, Colorado, were just beginning to stir. The sky was clear, and the early autumn air carried a hint of the coming chill. In the quiet neighborhood of Chelsea Park, 10-year-old Jessica Ridgeway prepared for her short walk to Witt Elementary School. Dressed in a cheerful purple outfit and carrying her backpack, she was the picture of innocence and excitement, ready for another day with her friends and teachers. Jessica's morning had been routine. Her mother, Sarah Ridgeway, had just finished a late shift at work and was catching a few hours of much-needed rest. Jessica, as independent as any 10-year-old could be, had everything under control. She'd been walking to school with her friends for years, a familiar and safe routine in their tight-knit community. At 8:30 a.m., Jessica set off down the sidewalk toward the park where she'd meet her classmates for the walk to school. She waved goodbye to her house as she passed, her purple backpack bouncing lightly with each step. For the residents of Chelsea Park, this was a typical morning, their neighborhood bathed in sunlight and silence. But Jessica never made it to school. When her teacher noticed her absence, they thought it was unusual, but not alarming. Kids missed school sometimes. A call was placed to Sarah Ridgeway to confirm her absence. The ringing phone stirred Sarah from her nap, confusion washing over her as she checked the time. Jessica should have been in class by now, but her phone calls went unanswered. At first, Sarah assumed her daughter had simply forgotten her phone or had been delayed. But as the minutes turned into hours, the unsettling reality began to sink in. Jessica was missing. The Ridgeway family immediately contacted the police, setting off a search that would consume the entire community. Law enforcement acted quickly, treating the case as an abduction from the very start. Officers canvassed the area, speaking to neighbors and friends who had seen Jessica leave her home that morning. Flyers bearing her smiling face were printed and distributed within hours. Volunteers joined the effort, combing the parks, streets, and fields around the neighborhood. The sense of urgency was palpable. Everyone knew the critical importance of the first 24 hours in a missing child case. By nightfall, the once quiet streets of Westminster were filled with searchlights and the hum of activity. Jessica's name was on everyone's lips, her purple outfit etched into their minds as they scoured the area for any sign of her. But as the hours stretched on with no leads, the initial hope of finding her quickly began to waver. Then came the first chilling clue. The next day, on October 6th, a backpack and water bottle, matching the description of Jessica's belongings, were found abandoned in a field several miles from her home. The discovery sent a wave of dread through the search teams and her family. How had her possessions ended up so far from the route she was supposed to take to school? The backpack was carefully examined by forensic teams, who hoped it would yield evidence, anything to bring them closer to finding Jessica. The search intensified. Helicopters with thermal imaging scanned the open fields and wooded areas. Canine units followed scent trails, but they led only to dead ends. The neighborhood was saturated with officers, volunteers, and media personnel, all fixated on one question: where was Jessica Ridgeway? As word spread beyond Westminster, the story captivated the nation. News stations broadcasted updates around the clock, and Jessica's face became a heartbreaking reminder of the fragile safety of childhood. Tips began pouring in from across the country, each one investigated with care, but ultimately leading nowhere. In the meantime, Jessica's disappearance left an indelible mark on the community. Parents no longer let their children walk alone, even in daylight. Neighbors who once waved warmly to one another now exchanged suspicious glances. The sense of security that had defined Chelsea Park was shattered. Days turned into a week, and then came the discovery no one wanted to make. On October 10th, searchers came across partial human remains in a desolate field not far from the neighborhood. Law enforcement was careful with their words, initially declining to confirm if the remains belonged to Jessica. But for the Ridgeway family and the community, the news felt like a blow to the chest. When the remains were identified as Jessica's, the world seemed to stop. The world seemed to stop. The bright, joyful girl with the purple backpack and a wide smile had been taken in the most horrifying way imaginable. The search for Jessica had come to a tragic end, but the hunt for the person responsible was only just beginning. The police knew they were now dealing with a dangerous individual, someone capable of committing an act so heinous it defied comprehension. Westminster transformed into a town on edge, every shadow hiding a potential threat. Investigators worked around the clock, piecing together the evidence and chasing down leads. The discovery of Jessica's remains marked the start of a new phase in the case, one that would take them into the mind of a monster lurking far too close to home. As the investigation into Jessica Ridgeway's disappearance shifted into a search for her killer, The once quiet streets of Westminster, Colorado, became a hive of activity. Law enforcement worked around the clock, determined to uncover the truth. The discovery of Jessica's remains had sent shockwaves through the community, and the urgency to find the person responsible was unlike anything the town had ever seen. The FBI joined the Westminster Police Department in what had become a massive operation. Crime scene technicians meticulously examined the area where Jessica's remains were found, looking for even the smallest clue. Footprints, fibers, and other trace evidence were collected, each piece potentially holding the key to identifying the individual who had taken Jessica from her family and community. As investigators pieced together a timeline, they turned their attention to the backpack and water bottle found days earlier. Forensic teams carefully examined these items, searching for fingerprints, DNA, or other physical evidence that could point to a suspect. The results were promising. Preliminary tests revealed the presence of biological material that did not belong to Jessica, offering a glimmer of hope that the perpetrator might have left behind a critical piece of evidence. Meanwhile, the neighborhood where Jessica lived was under intense scrutiny. Police conducted door-to-door interviews, asking residents if they had seen or heard anything unusual in the days leading up to her disappearance. Some neighbors reported seeing a suspicious vehicle idling near the park where Jessica was last seen, while others recalled unfamiliar faces in the area. Each tip was logged and investigated, though none immediately led to a breakthrough. The case gripped the nation, with news outlets providing continuous updates. Jessica's face, radiant and full of life, was splashed across screens and newspapers, her story resonating with parents and children alike. The tragedy felt personal, and the public's desire for justice only added to the pressure on law enforcement to find the person responsible. In the midst of the investigation, a series of chilling details began to emerge. The remains found in the field had been deliberately placed there, and the condition of the evidence suggested a calculated effort to obscure the killer's identity. This wasn't a random act of violence. It was planned and executed by someone who had taken significant steps to avoid detection. The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit worked alongside local investigators to construct a profile of the suspect. They believed the individual was likely someone who lived or worked near Westminster, someone familiar with the area and confident enough to move unnoticed. The profile suggested a young male, possibly in his late teens or early 20s, who might have exhibited troubling behavior or a fascination with violent crimes. These details were shared with the public during a press conference. Investigators urged residents to come forward with any information, no matter how insignificant it might seem. "Someone knows something," the lead investigator stated, his voice steady but urgent. "We need your help to bring justice for Jessica." The appeal brought a flood of tips, each one painstakingly investigated. Some leads were promising, reports of individuals with prior offenses or unsettling behavior, but none led directly to the person responsible. The frustration among investigators was palpable. They were certain the suspect was close, hiding in plain sight, but the pieces of the puzzle refused to fit together. As the search continued, Jessica's family remained at the heart of the community's support. Vigils were held in her honor, with hundreds of residents gathering to light candles and share memories of the vibrant girl who had touched so many lives. Purple ribbons, symbolizing Jessica's favorite color, adorned trees, lampposts, and mailboxes throughout Westminster. The town was united in its grief and determination to find the person who had shattered their sense of safety. Days turned into weeks, and the pressure on law enforcement only intensified. Investigators re-examined every piece of evidence, revisited every witness, and expanded their search radius. They knew time was their greatest enemy, but they refused to let Jessica's case go cold. Then in late October, the break they had been waiting for finally came. A local tip led them to an unexpected suspect, a 17-year-old boy who lived just miles from Jessica's home. The boy's name was Austin Sigg, and what investigators would discover about him would send shockwaves through the community once again. The break in Jessica Ridgeway's case came on an unassuming autumn day in late October. The call that led investigators to 17-year-old Austin Sigg was quiet and unremarkable, but its implications would shatter any remaining sense of normalcy in Westminster. Sigg's name had surfaced following a tip from someone close to him, someone who had noticed changes in his behavior and found his actions suspicious in the wake of Jessica's disappearance. Investigators wasted no time. They approached the Sigg home cautiously, armed with a search warrant. Inside, they were met with an ordinary suburban household, a facade that belied the dark truth hidden within. Austin Sigg, who had been attending a local community college and studying mortuary science, seemed calm but guarded. His demeanor betrayed no immediate signs of the horrors that would soon be uncovered. The search of Sigg's home began methodically. In his room, investigators found a disturbing collection of materials that painted a chilling picture of a young man fascinated by violence. Forensic tools, disassembled electronics, and graphic images were scattered among his belongings. But it was in the crawlspace beneath the home that investigators made the most significant discovery. Evidence linking Sigg directly to Jessica's disappearance was found there. Evidence so incriminating that it left no doubt about his involvement. When confronted, Sigg initially denied any wrongdoing, but the weight of the evidence was impossible to ignore. Over hours of questioning, his composure began to crack. Finally, in a chillingly calm confession, he admitted to taking Jessica's life. He spoke in measured tones, describing his actions with an eerie detachment that left investigators both horrified and baffled. Sigg's confession revealed a calculated and premeditated plan. He admitted to abducting Jessica as she walked to school, a crime of opportunity that he had carefully orchestrated. He detailed how he had taken her to his home, where the unspeakable events unfolded. His statements were cold and clinical, devoid of the remorse that investigators had hoped to find. The community's reaction to Sigg's arrest was immediate and visceral. How could someone so young commit such a monstrous act? The news that Jessica's killer had been a local boy, one who had lived among them, sent shockwaves through Westminster. Parents, already on edge, became even more protective of their children. Schools held assemblies on safety and awareness, and the once trusting neighborhood turned wary and cautious. As the legal process began, more details about Sigg's background emerged. He had struggled socially and academically, often described as quiet and introverted by those who knew him. But beneath his reserved exterior lay a fascination with violence and control. Investigators uncovered evidence suggesting that Jessica's murder was not his first attempt at harming someone. Months earlier, he had been linked to the attempted abduction of a jogger in the area, an attack that had gone unsolved until his arrest. The trial of Austin Sigg would become one of the most closely watched cases in Colorado's history. As investigators continued to piece together the evidence, they knew that bringing justice for Jessica would require them to confront the darkest aspects of human behavior. In court, Sigg's chilling demeanor and lack of remorse would stand in stark contrast to the memories of Jessica, a vibrant, innocent child whose life had been stolen in an act of unimaginable cruelty. The arrest of Austin Sigg marked a turning point in the case, but it was far from its conclusion. The road ahead would be marked by emotional testimonies, painstaking legal battles, and the lingering question of how such a tragedy could have been prevented. For Jessica's family and the community of Westminster, the fight for justice had only just begun. As the trial of Austin Sigg unfolded, the courtroom became a space of raw emotion and harrowing revelations. Jessica Ridgeway's family sat in quiet strength, their presence a testament to the resilience required to face the person who had taken their beloved daughter from them. The prosecution, armed with Sigg's confession and an overwhelming body of evidence, painted a picture of a calculated and remorseless individual. The proceedings began with a detailed recounting of the investigation. Detectives took the stand, describing the meticulous efforts that had led them to Sigg. They spoke of the evidence found in his home, the chilling confession he had provided, and the extensive forensic work that confirmed his involvement. Photographs, timelines, and digital records were presented, each piece of evidence building a case that left no room for doubt. Jessica's family and community listened intently, their grief palpable. They had come to honor Jessica's memory, to see justice served for the vibrant, joyful child they had lost. As the prosecution laid out the timeline of events, the courtroom was gripped by the sheer senselessness of the crime. The methodical nature of Sigg's actions, coupled with his chillingly calm demeanor, painted a picture of a young man deeply detached from the consequences of his actions. When it was the defense's turn, their strategy focused on Sigg's troubled past and mental health. Psychologists testified about his struggles with social isolation, academic challenges, and an obsession with violence that had gone unchecked. They argued that Sigg's upbringing and psychological profile had contributed to his actions, an attempt to provide context for an act that seemed otherwise incomprehensible. The prosecution countered with a sharp focus on Sig's premeditation and the harm he had caused. They highlighted the fact that Sig had meticulously planned the crime, going so far as to cover his tracks in an attempt to mislead investigators. His confession, while providing clarity, also revealed a disturbing lack of remorse. The prosecution emphasized that Sig's choices were deliberate and calculated, underscoring the need for accountability. Perhaps the most gut-wrenching moments of the trial came from the testimonies of Jessica's family. Her mother, Sarah Ridgeway, spoke through tears, sharing stories of Jessica's boundless energy, her love for art and music, and the joy she brought to everyone she met. Her words painted a vivid picture of the life that had been stolen, a life filled with promise and light. The impact on the community was also a focal point of the trial. Teachers, neighbors, and friends shared how Jessica's death had changed the fabric of their lives. They spoke of a neighborhood transformed by fear, of parents who no longer let their children walk to school, and of a town that had lost its sense of safety and trust. Their testimonies served as a reminder that the ripple effects of Sig's actions extended far beyond Jessica's family. As the trial neared its conclusion, the jury was faced with the weighty task of determining Sig's fate. The prosecution called for the maximum penalty, arguing that Sig's actions demonstrated a clear and present danger to society. The defense, while not disputing his guilt, sought leniency based on his age and psychological state. In the end, the verdict was unequivocal. Austin Sig was found guilty on all counts, including first-degree murder, and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The courtroom was silent as the sentence was read, the weight of justice both somber and final. Jessica's family, though relieved that the trial had reached its conclusion, knew that no sentence could ever bring her back. Their focus shifted to honoring her memory and ensuring that her story served as a catalyst for change. For the community of Westminster, the trial's conclusion marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of another, one centered on healing, resilience, and the pursuit of safety for all. With the trial of Austin Sig concluded, the people of Westminster, Colorado, began the arduous process of healing. The sentence, life without the possibility of parole, brought a sense of justice, but it could never erase the pain of losing Jessica Ridgeway. Her absence left a void in her family and community, but it also sparked a movement fueled by a shared desire to protect children and honor her memory. Jessica's family, determined to turn their grief into action, established initiatives in her name. These programs aim to educate families about safety and provide resources for preventing similar tragedies. Community centers hosted workshops on situational awareness, and schools implemented programs designed to teach children how to stay vigilant and avoid potentially dangerous situations. Purple ribbons, Jessica's favorite color, became symbols of hope, resilience, and remembrance throughout Westminster and beyond. The neighborhood where Jessica lived underwent a transformation. The park she had walked through so many times was revitalized and renamed in her honor. A memorial garden was built, complete with a plaque bearing Jessica's name and a quote that captured her spirit: "Always bright, always smiling." Families gathered there to reflect, finding solace in the beauty of the space dedicated to her memory. For law enforcement, the case became a blueprint for how to handle abductions and community involvement. Agencies across the country studied the investigation, recognizing the importance of rapid mobilization, community engagement, and collaboration among local, state, and federal authorities. Jessica's story became a case study for training programs, ensuring that lessons learned from her tragedy would help save lives in the future. The ripples of Jessica's story extended far beyond Westminster. Her case inspired a renewed focus on protecting children at a national level. Politicians and advocacy groups used her story to push for stronger laws and improved resources for families. Amber Alert systems were refined, and efforts to prevent and address crimes against children were bolstered by the outpouring of public support. Online, true crime communities kept Jessica's story alive, not as a tale of horror but as a reminder of resilience and action. Social media became a platform for sharing resources, supporting families, and educating others about safety. Jessica's face, once a symbol of loss, became a beacon for change, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there is hope. Despite these efforts, the impact of Jessica's loss remained deeply personal for those who knew her. Her friends, now teenagers, carried her memory with them as they grew. Teachers who had once seen her bright smile in their classrooms spoke of her often, ensuring that her legacy would not be forgotten. Her family, though forever changed, continued to find ways to celebrate her life, organizing events that brought the community together and highlighted the importance of safety and awareness. For the Ridgeways, healing was a daily journey. There were moments of joy as they remembered Jessica's laughter and the happiness she had brought into their lives. There were also moments of profound sorrow as they grappled with the reality of a life cut short. But through it all, they remained steadfast in their mission to honor Jessica's legacy, turning their tragedy into a force for good. The Monon High Bridge Trail, once a quiet place for reflection, became a site of remembrance and inspiration. Each visitor who walked its path was reminded of the importance of vigilance, community, and hope. Jessica's story became a testament to the strength of a community united by love and determination. As the years passed, Jessica Ridgeway's memory continued to shine brightly. Her life, though tragically brief, had left an indelible mark on those who knew her and those who came to know her story. And while the pain of her loss would never fully fade, her legacy served as a powerful reminder of the resilience of the human spirit and the capacity for a community to come together in the face of unimaginable loss. If these stories of young lives stolen too soon left you heartbroken or reflective, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more deep dives into the strange, dark, and mysterious. Turn on notifications so you never miss one of our daily uploads. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. What do you think can be done to better protect children and ensure justice for victims? Thank you for watching, and remember, staying aware and vigilant can save lives. Stay safe, stay curious, and we'll see you in the next story.